In a parenting environment where we're encouraged to try to change our baby's behavior instead of understand their development, it can be really refreshing to have an approach that looks more at changing the things around your baby. The challenge, of course, is that when we're looking at the things that we can change around sleep, we often underappreciate them. They are seemingly simple, kind of boring and repetitive, but they can really make a big difference in your baby's sleep. So listen in, I'm unpacking sleep hygiene today on the Baby Sleep Connection. Welcome to the Baby Sleep Connection, a podcast that explores baby sleep and more through the lens of attachment and development. I'm your host, Heather Boyd. I'm a mom of 3, an occupational therapist, and a certified infant and family sleep specialist. If you are a tired parent who wants to support your baby's sleep holistically, keep listening as we delve into approaches that go well beyond the usual strategies of wake windows and bedtime routines. Your baby's sleep is connected with so much more. Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Baby Sleep Connection. I'm your host, Heather Boyd, and today we're talking about ways to change sleep without changing your child. Now, most of the work that I do as a holistic sleep coach falls into this category, but we're going to be looking at some specific strategies today that fall under the umbrella of sleep hygiene. Now, I know as a parent myself that I dismiss sleep hygiene and the basics as not being as dramatic or effective as some of the strategies that I was hearing when I was trying to solve my baby's sleep. But the fact is, when there's a challenge with our baby's sleep, and things aren't going smoothly, we tend to get into fix-it mode. We're looking for that panacea, or we're looking for the big thing that's going to change sleep. So we research how to get our baby to fall asleep, or Google how to prevent our babies from having early wake-ups. Or we ask parents in our online mom group how to night wean so that we can get better sleep, or hope to get better sleep. What we often don't think about, however, is just how many of those things are related to trying to change our baby, possibly before they're ready, instead of changing all of the other things around sleep. And I think it's easy to underestimate just how valuable the basics of sleep hygiene are for getting better sleep. Because when it comes down to it, so often when we think there's a problem with our baby's sleep, we focus on the baby. In this episode, instead, we're going to pull back the curtain on all the changes that we can make to the environment, the routine, and the habits that we do leading up to sleep so that sleep can be easier. And there are 4 overall categories that we're going to cover today about sleep hygiene. So 4 basic things. The first one is timing. Now, we crave predictability, generally. Most of us do. And our babies do too, at least at the point when those patterns for sleep are starting to emerge. And having a consistent bedtime can go a long way to supporting an easier bedtime and better overnight sleep. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to pick a bedtime and never ever change it. If you become really inflexible about when you offer bedtime, you're treating your baby like a computer, not a human being. However, I do find that with clients, if there's a 30-minute window either side of an average bedtime, that can work quite well. I often, encourage families to kind of narrow that down a little bit into a 20-minute window on either side. But you get the idea that shoring into a general average and having that range be relatively shorter than it could be can be helpful. Now, keep in mind with younger babies, especially under 6 months, a pattern and circadian rhythm haven't emerged yet. So have grace with this process. A consistent bedtime won't make much sense yet, but it will. And picking a bedtime based on a book you read or someone else's social media post may not fit at all with your child's or your family's rhythm. So I caution you on picking a time that you're told is the quote-unquote right time to put your baby to bed. Not only that, but as your baby's sleep needs drop over the first 3 years, and as naps tend to be or get ready to be skipped, bedtime will be pushed later. Naps that are missed may push bedtime earlier. So don't be too stuck on the clock. Use it as something you are aiming towards instead of something that you are absolutely landing on. Because at the end of the day, literally at the end of the day, you've got to look at what your baby's needs are for that particular day, irrespective of what time it is and what any book tells you about the proper time. The timing of sleep is also important for inviting sleep when our children are tired, but not too tired. Bedtime tends to happen more easily and usually in less time when we find that sweet spot. And again, have grace with this process. You're not doing anything wrong if you don't find this elusive, ideal time for their sleep. It can be hard to find, so just be curious about whether earlier or later bedtime works for your baby. And if you've missed that sweet spot, if something happens that slows down bedtime routine when you know your baby would be ready for sleep, don't keep trying. Take a little break, get out of the bedroom, go downstairs for some quieter play, or go out into a room and cuddle with a book in a different room before going back in, even 45 minutes later when they're getting another cycle of readiness for sleep. We're basically looking at ideally babies falling asleep within 15 to 20 minutes, roughly, and it will vary, but we know that we're at least getting close to an ideal bedtime for your baby when that time is about 15 to 20 minutes. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about that falls under sleep hygiene is predictability and routines. Now, like with timing of bedtime routines can feel a little bit sketchy at first, right? They don't feel very clear. We're talking about consistency and routines, and yet I'm saying it's unclear, but it does just take a little bit of time and patience to kind of shore this up into something that works for you. Ultimately, most of us thrive when we have at least some idea of what's going to be happening next and when, and babies and children are no different. So what I suggest to parents, and we cover this in the group program that I run, what I suggest to parents is that they create a bedtime routine that meets their child's needs and their own needs, which mainly means that it's something predictable and enjoyable. Like if you like it and you're looking forward to it, that's a big win. In fact, I would say often our children are looking to us to figure out, is this something that's kind of nice? Like, does this work? And if we're enjoying it, then they're going to be using us as a model for that too. And again, this takes time. It can feel really inconsistent at first, but stick with figuring out a routine that you like, because once you've created something that you like, something that's simple, something that feels good, and something that's predictable, then you're able to add that layer of routineness to your baby's sleep that allows their brain to know it's time to wind down and that sleep is coming. This is like habits, right? When we have habits, they start to happen automatically without us having to think about it. And we don't want to be really thinking about falling asleep all that often. Now, I know it's a bit of an obsession the first 3 years, at least it was for me. I was thinking about sleep an awful lot. But when we can get into some predictability and some routines, it takes a lot of the heavy lifting off of our backs. Now, when life throws a curveball, which you know it will, whether it's teething or illness or holidays or traveling or visitors, don't worry. Routines are about showing up consistently over time. So just get back in the groove the next night and just keep going. Also know that routines evolve over time. You're not going to find the routine that works really well right off the bat, or at least not likely. So stick with it and find something that works for you over time. And know that that routine will change over time for a lot of reasons, partly because your baby's needs will be changing, partly because your whole family culture may change in terms of the way that your life is designed and the activities you have in the evening. Our bedtime routine with my kids looks entirely different, of course, than families with younger babies. Now, the third aspect of sleep hygiene that I want to talk about today is this lead up to bedtime. So what happens before the bedtime routine? Like with routines at bedtime, a kind of prep period leading up to bedtime can be helpful, but it doesn't have to be really elaborate and it doesn't have to be as consistent as a bedtime routine. The idea behind this is that if you go from running around in the backyard to putting on pajamas, there may be some resistance because we're not good at that kind of fast switch or transition. And especially our kids are often not very good with that switch and transition. So this lead up to bedtime can be looking at what happens between dinner and the start of that nicely curated, I'll say, bedtime routine. It could be things like tidying up together after dinner, popping your baby in a baby carrier while you wipe off the kitchen counter, connecting with your older kiddos for a recap of the day, spending time playing board games with older kids, or reading downstairs or in the living room with younger kids, starting to turn off lights as you move towards the bath or bedroom, or even, in this time of year, a nice evening stroll because the air is warmer. These things are helpful for bedtime because they are a tip-off to the brain that sleep is coming. The evening is unfolding in a way that's predictable. It does not mean that every night will be the same. At this stage of our family's life, every night's a little bit different. We have different activities that bring us to different bedtimes. But there is still some basic stay-at-home family time kind of lead ups that we do. Of course, it's changing all the time. We just got a basketball net. So one of our evening activities right now is throwing hoops. And it's a nice activity to get out a little bit of energy, which we're actually going to talk about in point number 3. But it's nice to get out, do something as a family and connect, finding what works for you guys and for your family. Finding what works for your family is key, but that lead up is a nice way of just giving a little bit more of a runway to bedtime. When I talk to parents in my coaching program, we often talk about this runway, like basically from dinner to bedtime, what is happening? Is there too much being packed in there? Are the activities creating a bit of a path towards your bedtime routine, or are they throwing you off and bringing you further away from when you can wind down for bedtime? For some kids, that lead up to bedtime can include a bit of a burst of roughhousing as part of the bedtime routine to let off a little steam. There are a lot of kids that need that. They have this need to just release that last little bit. Other kiddos need to just kind of have a predictable winding down and slowing down to get towards bedtime. The fourth idea that I want to talk about today is daytime activities. So we were just talking about letting off steam, but let's talk about all that steam and all that energy during the day. Kids have a lot of it, and having ways to move that energy through their body during the day can make a big difference at night. So looking at what your baby enjoys movement-wise. Do they like big pounding play? Do they like noisy play or swinging? For younger babies, it might be rolling or crawling or moving their bodies against gravity to reach up to one of those dangling toys. What is it that really fills their movement cup up? In general, there's been a drop in activity level for kids, and yet we know that physical activity supports sleep. So finding a way to incorporate and fold in ample opportunities for them to play is a really great idea for supporting sleep. It may not be a dramatic difference in sleep, but it's one of these things that when we layer on all of these things that we can change around sleep, this is just one more layer that can support healthy sleep. Of course, healthy food is important too. There is a distinct gut-brain connection. And if you've worked with me, you know I talk about this gut-brain connection an awful lot. When we fuel our bodies with healthy food, we're fueling our brain, and the brain is where sleep happens. Now, in Waldorf philosophy, there's a general approach to offer muffins or toast as a nighttime snack. Dave Asprey, the father of biohacking, suggests that adults have carbs or naturally sweetened snack at night or later in the evening to support healthy sleep in adults. It may be one layer that you can try, and it's certainly one that I've suggested to some parents, especially for parents who have kids that seem to wake up voraciously hungry, that having a particular snack like that, a healthy one, may make a difference. And it's not that a bedtime snack is necessary, but it could be a way to round out the day and might even support sleep. Now, daytime activities that support sleep also, of course, include sleep itself, naps, or rest time. The naps in particular relieve that sleep pressure that's building up that allows babies to get to bedtime without being overtired. Now, the fourth category I want to talk about with sleep hygiene is the environment. And I'm dividing it into two kinds of environments. The physical, what we see, like the setup of the room, and the emotional environment. So let's talk about the physical environment. You've likely heard about blue light. In fact, I think I've mentioned it on an earlier podcast episode. This is wavelength of sunrise that raises our cortisol hormone that helps us start our day. We want to reduce blue light at night because we don't want to be raising cortisol. Blue light can come from fluorescent lighting and many of the electronic devices we use. Most of our devices have blue shade that turns the screen more to a sepia or yellowed look. But ironically, some street lights in some cities could be blue light as well. So that street lamp that turns on outside of your baby's bedroom at night may be blue light, which can interfere. I don't know why the designers of these street lamps chose blue. I wish they hadn't, because it really is ironic and it's the exact opposite of what we're wanting as we lead up to bedtime. But there's some research that's been popping up that also suggests that brightness may be just as important as whether it's blue or red hue. And so that even if it's not blue, it could be getting in the way of easier sleep. So in general, start turning down the lights. I talked about that as far as the lead up to bedtime. Turn down lights and devices a couple of hours leading up to bedtime. Start winding down the house. Think of putting the house to sleep as well. It can be part of that pre-bedtime routine. Of course, physical environment also includes things like temperature, humidity, dust, clutter, having a tidy environment, and having particular items in your child's sleep space, like toys and playthings. We know from studies with university students that studying in the same room as sleeping can interfere with good quality sleep. So keeping an environment that is relatively simple, and that doesn't mean dull and gray, that simple environment can be supportive. So having a rather simple, tidy room with a few key things that make that evening ritual of the bedtime enjoyable is great. Whether it's a few non-electronic, non-battery operated toys and a few books in a basket, it's a nice way to focus on how to have that environment feel good, even to us as adults, right? Having a nice print on the wall, considering the color of the room as something that could impact how alert or relaxed we are can be a factor as well. Now, the other part of environment is emotional environment. And one-on-one clients who have had intakes with me know that I ask about the emotional environment. It's part of the landscape of sleep, and it's part of what we can focus on to make sleep easier. Sleep is a vulnerable state. We need to feel safe and calm to fall asleep, and so do our babies. So connection in the evening through dancing or cuddling or singing together or rocking or smiling and talking face to face and connecting for that last little bit at some point in the evening, reading together. These are all ways that you can kind of reset and smooth over any of the conflict or frustration that may have built over the day. It allows that connection that helps babies feel safe and secure enough to fall asleep. And I'll share a little story at this point. I still remember my kids telling me at bedtime, Mom, Dad is fun during the day, but you're fun at night. And I don't think they actually meant I was fun, like wild and energetic and lively. I just think that I was very, very aware that bedtime was my last chance to put a bit of a cherry on top of the day, so that no matter what kind of day we had, no matter how I felt about whether I'd measured up or lost my cool, I could still end the day on a high note. And when we understand that sleep is separation for at least a little bit, and for those that are sleeping through the night, sleep is a very long separation for our children. If we can end the day with that connection, that can make a really big difference in how our babies and children slide into sleep for the evening. I find that many young children also benefit from a bit of a recap of the day to help them process things. We know a lot of that processing and long-term memory happens in sleep, so it can help to kind of recap the day as part of the bedtime routine. If there are frustrations that came up or challenges, bedtime is often when older children or preschoolers really want to share all these stories. They really open up their heart. Leave time for that. Leave time for the opening of the heart that always happens when we're thinking that the day is almost done. But I promise you, leaving time for that is nothing but a win, because you will hear what is on your child's mind. You'll hear what's in their heart. You'll be able to help them process some of the awesome and exciting or overwhelming and confusing things that happened that day. And that can make a really big difference in letting them go into sleep with the slate cleared or with their brain ready to kind of process that on a positive note. We also, I think all of us benefit from developing a gratitude practice. I talk about this with a lot of the families that I'm working with, that even children who aren't speaking can be part of a gratitude practice. I have parents that have done this with babies long before they're even able to say words. If we're sharing what we're grateful for, even before they're able to share what they're grateful for, gosh, what a wonderful way to lead by example. So I want to end there, but I'll try to do a little recap for those that have perhaps gotten distracted during this podcast. But we talked about the idea that we can change sleep without changing our child, and we can do that with sleep hygiene. We can look at the timing of sleep so that it's predictable. We can get a nice bedtime routine that is also predictable. We can think about how to have a bit of a runway from dinner to bedtime. We can look at the activities our baby does during the day that can support sleep, mainly around movement. That's where I put a lot of my attention, is on the movement piece. But certainly lots can happen during the day that can support or get in the way of sleep. We also talked about the environment, how the setup of the physical environment matters, and the emotional environment. And I'd like to finish with these words that I'm paraphrasing from Gordon Neufeld. And that is that sleep is the biggest separation that we are frequently, like daily, asking our kids to handle. For babies in particular who need that closeness with us for co-regulation, sleep is a very significant separation. So when we can practice some of these very basics of sleep hygiene, including the emotional and physical environment, daytime activities, the routines and rhythms of bedtime, and the bed timing, what time bedtime happens. This can all add layers that make sleep easier. And for me, with parents that are exhausted in the first few years of parenting, that can make all the difference. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I do hope that you found the information and perspectives in this podcast episode helpful to you as you navigate your baby's sleep development. Of course, this podcast provides general information and it isn't tailored to your family's reality or the specific needs of your baby. If you're concerned about your baby's sleep or health, be sure to reach out to your healthcare provider. If you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and you need a place to feel nurtured and reassured, you can find me on Instagram at familysleep.ca. Until next episode, look for the connections that support you and your baby.